Welcome to the evolution series of Carlin 5, where we explore how life evolved in the superhabitable planet of star Darion, known as Carlin 5. A superhabitable planet is a type of planet much larger than that of Earth, and have a very stable orbit around a long-living star. This planet is the subject of our observations of the evolution of life, from the very beginning of life to hundreds of millions of years. The name Carlin 5 is only a designation, and as life evolved around this planet, so too its name will evolve. This is Clemenson bringing you the Carlin 5 project. Carlin 5 is a planet almost 2 times larger than Earth with a gravity of 16 meters per second squared. This makes an average human to feel 2 times heavier than on Earth. But this makes the planet have more space for life to flourish, allowing for even greater diversity. This planet orbits a K-type orange dwarf star, just 40% smaller than our Sun. It is cooler and dimmer than our Sun, but this star can last as long as 50 billion years, giving life enough time to evolve on this planet. It has 2 moons, one closer but smaller than Earth's moon, and a second much larger and farther. This will cause the ocean currents and the tides to be very chaotic, as well as giving it a very unpredictable weather. Its surface pressure is 3.3 atmospheres, which is 3 times more than on Earth, due to the thick atmosphere of the planet. Its atmosphere is currently 79% nitrogen and 20% carbon dioxide. Its xenon percentage is higher, taking up to 0.7% of the volume. This planet is ripe for life to flourish, and after 3 billion years after its formation, the first sign of life appeared. As the first bacterial life on Carlin 5 appeared, one thing to note that despite it looking similar to bacteria on Earth, it is essentially different. The DNA which we are familiar with on Earth is not the one we are used to. It is called an XNA or xenonucleic acid, which is an alternative to DNA. This bacteria has an XNA called KNA, where instead of 2 base pairs, it has 3 base pairs, alongside guanine, adenine, cytosine, and thymine. It has nucleic acids such as parathymine and claritine, hence where K in KNA comes from. DNA can code for 20 amino acids, while KNA can code for 60 amino acids, which may result to a more extensive protein gallery foreign to Earth and allows for familiar proteins to converge. This doesn't make KNA superior to DNA, however. KNA is prone to UV radiation and it is very weak hydrogen bond, making it prone to mutations as well. It is very unstable, but the ozone layer in the thick atmosphere of the planet makes KNA the dominant nucleic acid. This doesn't make KNA superior to DNA, however. KNA is prone to damage by UV radiation, and it has a very weak hydrogen bond, making it prone to mutations as well. It is very unstable, but the ozone layer in the thick atmosphere of the planet make KNA the dominant nucleic acid. This may be different to what we are familiar with, but it is possible that if we were to discover alien life, they will have biochemistries different from ours. As DNA might be the dominant nucleic acid on Earth, it is possible hundreds or thousands of different DNA alternatives in the universe. The bacteria on this planet is very familiar, however, but one thing we first noticed is the yellow coloration of some of them. The yellow bacteria we see here are photosynthetic. Unlike our photosynthetic cyanobacteria, they use a yellow pigment called xanthophullose, which is similarly to chlorophyll. These bacteria will be called xanthobacteria. This oxygenates the planet to 35% of the atmospheric volume, which leads to several ice ages. Then the first eukaryotes emerged, cells with a nucleus. One day, these eukaryotes absorb the bacteria that can produce energy from oxygen. Then, the absorbed bacteria somehow didn't get digested, but instead becomes a symbiote to the eukaryote. It provides its host with energy while it is protected. In time, this bacteria becomes something analogous to a mitochondria called oxyplasts. Then yellow-colored algae arise after absorbing cyanobacteria, and the bacteria became the chloroplasts or xanthoplasts of the algae. These eukaryotes will slowly evolve and diversify into many different species, all having different shapes and sizes. Soon, they will evolve to be colonial, and they will evolve to be multicellular, thus starting the Pacifican period. The Pacifican period is the first period for multicellular life. It began about 9 billion years after the first bacteria arose. For clarity, we can make this the 0th year of life on the planet. The Pacifican period is similar to the Ediacaran period on Earth, where life is mostly sessile, feeding on the microbial mat, and life is only experimenting on multicellularity. Most of the multicellular life at this point are sponge-like organisms called poriformes, and they are essentially similar to sponges on Earth, having the same feeding strategies by pumping water into their bodies, collecting plankton and bacteria. There were innumerable clades that come and go during the Pacifican period, many having different body plans that suit their needs. But in the late Pacifican period, 4 major animal-like clades won the race to multicellularity. The Asterformes, which are split into Brachiogastrans and Hexaformes, the bilaterally symmetrical Dumperdiatans, and the strange glass-like Tubularis. These 4 clades will become the basis of multicellular life on Macallan 5. The Brachiogastrans are the first major phyla that emerged from the Asterformes, named for their branching radial arms. They resemble cnidarians, but instead of having one opening for feeding and excretion, they have multiple mouths and a single anus. These mouths open to their esophagus or distal gut, where they release digestive juices which softens their food item. It also absorbs the nutrients as they travel through the gut. Then all the distant guts meet at the central stomach, where further digestion and absorption occurs. Then waste will be excreted through the anus. They can have up to 2 to 10 mouths. This is unusual, but it seems that it is advantageous for them, which they can effectively catch and filter plankton in the water. They also carry a colorful appearance. This is due to the algal symbiotes. Many of the Brachiogastrans rely on them for food, similar to how corals rely on zooxanthellae. Their larval form are small and planktonic, with cilia allowing them to swim in the water and feed on bacteria or plankton. They resemble kinetophores found on Earth. The anterior is where the mouths are located, and the posterior is where their anus is located. Once they reach maturity, they will attach to hard surfaces or substrate with their posterior and become a polyp. This polyp would resemble a hydra on Earth. Their anterior mouths are arranged upwards where the mouth will have access to food, while the anus is located at the lateral bottom. They can grow into their adult size and reproduce sexually using broadcast spawning, where eggs and sperm are released from their mouths into the water and be fertilized when they meet. Sexual reproduction is important to keep the genetic diversity of the species diverse, allowing the species to be flexible to changes in the environment. The fertilized egg will grow into a larva and the cycle will start again. They can also reproduce asexually by budding, which is a process where a new organism grows up to the parent as a bud and will eventually detach into an independent organism identical to their parent. However, this only makes clones of the parent and will not promote genetic diversity, but it allows the organism to spread faster. There are also 4 different forms that a brachiogastran can exhibit, each with their own body plan and shape. The simplex form is one such form that we just discussed, with the mouth located upwards while the anus is located below. This is the most common form of the brachiogastrans. The Polynistardilia is one such organism. They can form colonies together with each other or through budding. Another form is the inverted form, similar to the simplex form, but its anus faces upwards. They have a more flattened shape than simplex form. This is due to the calcified bottom, which helps them in attaching to the substrate. This in turn blocks the passageways in the bottom, so they evolved to have their anus be found pointed upwards. The Daclopalma is one such example. Another form is the anemoid. They resemble sea anemones on Earth with upward projecting tentacles. Unlike the general body plan of most brachiogastrans, they have a single mouth and multiple anuses, where the mouth is located at the top and anuses are found at the lateral bottom side. This is the result of the switching of roles of the mouth and anus after their larval state, where they attach to the substrate using their anterior. One last form, the spongiform. They adopted a similar strategy to sponges by constant beating of their flagella and cilia. This creates a strong current that pulls food particles and plankton into the gut cavity, where it will be digested and expelled into a cavity called an osculum. They are the most diverse group in terms of shape and structure, forming colonies consisting of hundreds or thousands of individuals in a calcified body. The brachiogastrans are one of the most important groups of the ocean. They will become the reef builders and remain the same throughout the history of the planet, but we will go back to them from time to time throughout the series. Now, we'll look at the next major organism. This strange-looking organism is the Flachexiformis. They are a crawling benthic organism with a hexagonal or hexaradial shape. They are closely related to the brachiogastrans, that they have the same defining features of having several mouths and a single anus. However, what separates them from their armed cousins is the presence of a true coelom. Their coelom allows for more complex organ systems. Also, unlike the brachiogastrans, the Hexiformis exclusively have 6 downward-facing mouths. They are located at the end of each of the 6 sides, hence the name, and they have a single anus above. Below them is their foot, which moves in a snail-like fashion. They also have hair protrusions that line their feet. They are cilia, which are used to graze on the microbial mat that carpets the seafloor. They leave behind a trail in the microbial mat, which will then grow back quickly in time. They have a simple digestive system with a distal digestive gland and a central stomach. As seen in this section, you can see how food is delivered into the central stomach before being expelled through the anus. One cannot digest food without getting the food inside. The Hexiformis has a sort of radula on each end of the distal points. A radula is similar to a snail's mouth to grind food, especially in an organism that eats the microbial mat. They may also have filamentous hair-like structures protruding from their anus. These are used to catch plankton and particulates in the water before being brought down into the anus, allowing them to also filter feed. The Hexiformis has a very simple nervous system, which runs across the digestive system, controlling the glands and muscle of the organism, allowing them to move their body, manipulate food, and excrete enzymes and digestive juices in a controlled manner. When reproducing, the hexaformis mainly use broadcast spawning, releasing their gametes out of their aboral anus. However, unlike their brachiogastad cousins, they have lost the ability to asexually reproduce, making the hexaformis the first clade to exclusively use sexual reproduction. Their simple body plan allows this organism to be flexible in their environment, and as they can be found everywhere where microbial mats are present. Next, we are going to tackle the Noperdiatans, a clade of bilaterally symmetrical animals. One of the first Noperdiatan clades are the Pseudofolians. These plant-like animals are very small, around 2 centimeters on average, and used filter feeding to acquire nutrients. The Pseudofolian attach themselves into the thick microbial mat using a holdfast, which are root-like structures keeping the animal from being taken away by the water current. Their leaf-like bodies act to catch floating plankton or detritus. They absorb what they can catch into their body as they do not have a mouth, but they do have a gut-like cavity inside which produces digestive juices. The Pseudofolian may also have algal symbionts, which provides them with food under the sunlight. They also have hair-like filaments that line the sides of the Noperdiatans. This further increases the area for filter feeding. As they grow larger in size, the greater the amount of food is absorbed. One key aspect to note, since they do not have a true gut, they have no way to remove undigested waste, but they have the use for this. They let waste build up at the bottom of the animal, letting them harden, building a rock shell, which helps the Pseudofolians attach further into the substrate. One thing that is observed is that Pseudofolians have repeating segments. As they grow, they create new segments identical to the appearance of the bottom segments, allowing the organism to be consistent with its body plan and feeding strategy. This repeating pattern also has another advantage. These segments are identical copies of one another. This means that if one of the segments is cut off from the main body, they can live independently from the original body and grow as a new organism. This allows the strategy for asexual reproduction using budding, where the topmost segment is cut off and live as a new organism. They can also be observed to do sexual reproduction as well, using broadcast spawning. Their larvae are planktonic and small. They swim weakly in the water current using their hair-like cilia. They also undergo budding, which will eventually lead to pseudofolian planktonic blooms in suitable conditions. Once they have found a suitable place to attach, they will lose their ability to swim and grow a holdfast. This is their adult stage and will grow and start the cycle anew. The final phyla we are going to look at are the Tubularis. Tubularis are a clade of multicellular tube-like animals directly related to the Poriformes. Their defining feature is that they seem to have the ability to produce a cellulose-like molecule called modularin, because they have a gene that expresses the production of modularin. This is because of a chance mutation called horizontal gene transfer. Horizontal gene transfer is a phenomenon where an organism receives a gene from another organism. Usually, they came from viruses, or from a consumption of the gene was somehow included into the embryonic cells. This is similar to earth-tunicates, which received a gene that produces cellulose-like molecule called tunicin from horizontal gene transfer with a bacteria. In the Tubularis case, they got the gene from their algal symbiotes. This modularin gives them a gelatinous or almost silky texture, transparent enough to house algal symbiotes within their tissue. They also retain the ability to produce spicules from their Poriformes cousins. These spicules are sparsely distributed along the modularin to provide the organism a shape while remaining flexible. Myotubularis are filter feeders, feeding mainly on phytoplankton through suction from their posterior flagellated cells. The flagella of the cells creates a forward force, allowing for simple jet propulsion-like movement. Many tubularis recruited algae into their mesoglia to provide them with oxygen as well as food, while the tubularis provides them with shelter as well as nutrients. These organisms can reproduce sexually using broadcast spawning or asexually using budding, as most species during the Pacifican period. These basal organisms will soon give rise to myotubularis, a clade that evolved muscular bands and a simple nerve net around their bodies. They abandoned using flagellum and use rhythmic muscle contraction instead, creating jet propulsion to propel themselves. This is significantly more efficient than flagella, allowing them to move consistently in a direction. They still rely on their permeable membrane to directly absorb oxygen, however. As the organism grows larger, the harder for the oxygen to diffuse deeper into the organism. As a result from their rhythmic muscle contractions, soon they develop a heart-like system and a hemocoel-like cavity, which is filled with fluid which transports nutrients and gases more efficiently. This allows for the organism to grow much larger. As the myotubularis grows larger, it became apparent that size doesn't mean it's better. As the heart and muscles became less efficient as the organism grows larger, as a result, instead of a single large organism, it forms a colony of multiple smaller organisms. The colony will consist of genetically similar or clones of the original individual. This is possible through budding. These clones will still attach to their parent, sharing nutrients among themselves and their parent, maximizing the area of their nutrient intake without sacrificing their metabolic efficiency. As an added bonus, as more individuals are in the colony, the faster they are in movement, which in turn makes them tremendously efficient in movement, requiring less energy while feeding on the abundant plankton. These new colonial organisms will be called modularis for their modular and colonial strategy. With their algal symbiotes, the colonies become larger and larger and become major feeders of the pelagic biomes of the Pacifican period. Now that we have explored the planet and the basal phyla in the Pacifican period, this will become the basis of future evolution yet to come on this planet. These organisms will evolve across millions of years and new clades will rise and fall. Next episode, we're going to explore the transition to the Marianas explosion and its incredible diversity. Thank you all for watching, and see you again in the next episode.